My name is Ellie Carter. The night I nearly died alone, my parents were laughing at a movie theater 2 miles away. They chose popcorn and Kelsey, my golden child sister, over my trembling voice on the phone begging for help. I survived. But they don't know I remember everything. And one day they'll understand what it cost me. Before we start, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. I read every one. Now, lean in. This story begins on a stormy night in Oregon, and nothing was ever the same again. It was the chemical smell that hit me first. Sharp, artificial, wrong. I was in my apartment, curled under a fleece blanket on the old beige couch I'd dragged here from my last place. Rain lashed the windows like fingernails. At first, I thought maybe it was something outside, maybe someone burning trash in the alley. But the air was getting thicker, harsher. I stood up dizzy and realized, whatever it was in the apartment. My fingers trembled as I grabbed my phone and dialed the one person I thought would always pick up. Dad. His voice was muffled by background noise, laughter, maybe a soda fizzing. What is it, Ellie? There's a weird chemical smell in my place. It's really strong. I coughed. I don't feel good. I think I need help. There was a pause. Then I heard Kelsey giggling in the background. We're at the movies, he said, sounding annoyed now. It's Kelsey's night. My stomach dropped. I think it's serious. Can you just come by after or call someone? He sighed. Ellie, it's probably just your building's maintenance again. Didn't you say they were working on something? That was last week, I whispered, but he had already turned back to the laughter behind him. I've got to go, don't be dramatic. Click, that was it. I stood in the middle of my living room, phone still pressed to my ear, the smell now so strong I could taste it, like burnt plastic and metal. I tried opening the window, but the rain came in sideways, stinging my skin. My vision blurred. My hands shook as I texted Kelsey. No response. I wrapped a scarf around my face and tried to stay near the door. My lungs burned. My legs went weak. I remember thinking, maybe if I fall asleep, I'll feel better. The storm outside cracked open the sky like a warning. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I realized it wasn't just the chemicals or the storm. It was the truth settling in my bones. I was completely, terrifyingly alone. I don't remember losing consciousness. One second I was huddled near the door, the next white. Blinding, sterile white. The kind that buzzes behind your eyelids and hums in your ears. At first, I thought I was dreaming. That I drifted into some odd floating space where everything was too bright, too cold. Then I felt something press over my mouth, plastic tight. I tried to lift my hand and couldn't. Panic jolted through me like a surge of electricity. She's awake, a voice said, clipped and urgent. Vitals still low, hang in there, sweetheart. My eyes flicked open. A masked face loomed above me, eyes calm but focused. You're safe now, you're in an ambulance, he said. Ambulance? I wanted to ask what happened. Why I couldn't move. Why my chest hurt like it had been crushed. But the mask made speech impossible. My arms were strapped down lightly, not cruelly, just enough to keep me from thrashing. Another paramedic leaned over with a bag. O2 saturation is improving, just keep her breathing steady. I looked past them out the back window. Rain still blurred the glass, but orange glows danced across the surface, flames. My apartment was on fire. That smell, whatever chemical cocktail had invaded my home, must have sparked something. My brain tried to piece it together, but everything felt scrambled. How had I gotten out? Who had called 911? The answer struck me in a wave of dread. Not my parents. Not the man who told me not to be dramatic. Not the sister who hadn't even texted back. If it hadn't been for a neighbor or some miracle passerby. The idea that I could have died on that floor, completely alone, without anyone in my family even noticing, sliced through me. I felt tears leaking from the corners of my eyes, soaking into the stiff fabric beneath my head. The paramedic noticed but didn't comment. Just gave my hand a gentle squeeze. When we reached the ER, things blurred again. I was wheeled through corridors, bright lights flashing overhead like something out of a war movie. The stench of burned cloth clung to me. Voices shouted numbers and codes I didn't understand. Then came the sharp cut of scissors through fabric, the cool sting of antiseptic, the surreal realization that they were cutting my clothes off. that my body was not fully responding. My skin, raw and blistered, told its own story. Pain came in waves, each stronger than the last. I must have blacked out again, because when I opened my eyes next, I was in a hospital bed. My left arm was wrapped from shoulder to wrist. An IV pulsed beside me. Machines beeped. My lips were dry and I could barely move my head. But I was alive and still alone. A nurse walked in mid-40s, kind eyes, red hair pinned back in a practical bun. "Oh, good, you're awake," she said gently, adjusting something on the monitor. "You've been through a lot, you're safe here." I wanted to ask the one thing that had burned through every second since the ambulance. Did my parents come? She seemed to read my thoughts. "No family has arrived yet. But you're stable now. We'll contact them again." Again. The word echoed like a taunt. I hadn't imagined it then. They really hadn't come. No one had come, not even a call back, not a rushed arrival in the ER, not a frantic demand to know what room I was in, just silence. I pressed my fingers into the blanket, needing to feel something real. I didn't want to cry again, but the betrayal settled into me like frost, slow and deep. Maybe they were waiting for Kelsey to finish her popcorn first. I looked out the small hospital window. The rain had stopped, but everything still dripped, like the world itself had been wrung out and left empty. That's how I felt, too. A nurse brought me a phone later that day. I gripped it in my bandaged hand and stared at the screen for a long time before finally dialing. My father picked up on the third ring. "Ellie," I choked on the lump in my throat. "I was in a fire," I whispered. "The apartment. I'm in the hospital." Silence. Then, "Oh, is it bad? I almost died." "We didn't hear anything," he said quickly, defensive. "We were out. Kelsey's movie ran late. I didn't see your message until this morning." Of course, a full 24 hours later. "Are you coming?" I asked, the smallest, stupidest piece of me still hoping. "Of course," he said. "We'll get there as soon as we can." But they didn't come that day or the next. The nurses brought me extra blankets. A sweet woman named Lisa sat with me when the nightmares came. The patient in the next bed offered me a lollipop from her get-well basket and told me about her dog. And somehow, all these strangers made me feel more loved than my own family. It took me 3 days to stop expecting them. Every time a nurse gently knocked before entering, my heart jumped. Some feral part of me still believed my mother's perfume would float in next, or I'd hear the impatient tap of Kelsey's acrylic nails on her phone. But it was never them. It was Lisa with more applesauce. Or Jeremy, the janitor who always nodded and said, "You're tough, kid," on his way to mop up the night's chaos. Or it was silence. On the 4th morning, I finally asked the nurse to stop trying my parents' number. She hesitated, her lips pursing like she was holding back judgment. "They said they'd come. They're just busy," I muttered, already regretting how defensive it sounded. She gave a sad little smile. "You don't have to explain." That was the first time I cried that day. Not for the burns on my back or the wreckage of everything I owned, but for the lie I kept telling myself. That they cared, that they'd show up eventually. They didn't. Instead, I got flowers from a woman 2 doors down who I'd only met once in group therapy. An awkward teenage volunteer brought me a card drawn in crayon. A little girl in the pediatric unit named Alyssa had overheard I was alone and wanted to send a brave grown-up some sunshine. It worked. I taped her card to the wall right beside my vitals monitor. Every time the pain spiked, I'd look at her son with a smiley face and the words "You can do it" in shaky block letters. She even spelled my name wrong, and I couldn't have cared less. On the 5th day, the therapist came in. Her name was Daedra, and she wore jeans under her lab coat and had rings on every finger. "Looks like you've been through hell," she said without preamble, sitting down in the chair by my bed. I appreciated her honesty. I was tired of people pretending I wasn't a melted, bruised shadow of who I used to be. "I'm fine," I said automatically. She raised a brow. "Want to try that again?" I didn't respond. She glanced at her clipboard, flipping a page. "The EMTs said you were found unconscious by your front door. Your neighbor smelled smoke and broke the lock." "Lucky me." "Yeah," she said softly. "Lucky someone cared enough to check." That landed harder than I expected. I bit my lip. "I'm running a trauma group here," she added. "If you're interested, we don't pressure anyone, just stories, connection." Sometimes the people sitting in this circle become more of a family than the ones we were born into. She stood to leave. Think about it, same room as breakfast. And with that, she was gone. I didn't go that morning or the next, but I did sit up when breakfast was delivered, just so I could hear the voices floating in from down the hall. Laughter, swearing, someone playing guitar off-key. I listened like a child outside a birthday party she wasn't invited to. Until one day I rolled myself there. It wasn't glamorous. I had a compression bandage under my hoodie and had to rest twice between my room and the meeting space. But when I made it, no one stared. A woman with a missing eyebrow waved me over. A guy in a wheelchair moved his chair to make room. "Name's Cora," said the eyebrow woman. "Burned half my house trying to deep fry a turkey. Welcome to the Char Club." The guy next to her grinned. "That's Dave. I got hit by a drunk driver. Now my ribs whistle." They all laughed. When it was my turn, I just said, "Ellie, smoke inhalation, apartment fire." I expected pity. What I got was nods, understanding. Someone passed me a small juice box. And for the first time since the ambulance, I laughed. A short, broken little laugh, but it was mine. Later that afternoon, I finally called my parents again. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to prove I still had it in me to try. Kelsey answered. "Ellie," she said, like she'd picked up a wrong number. "You okay?" "I'm out of ICU. Thought you should know." A pause. "That's good. We've been meaning to come by, but Dad's got the tax stuff this week and I've had, like, the worst migraines." Of course, the worst. "You don't have to explain," I said, echoing the nurse's words. "I won't be calling again." She didn't respond, not even a sorry. I hung up. By the time Daedra came around again, I was sitting upright with the sun on my face and Alyssa's crayon card in my lap. "So," she said, peeking over her glasses, "did you find what you needed in that room?" "No," I said quietly, "but I found something I didn't know I deserved." 3 weeks and 4 surgeries later, they finally discharged me. I didn't feel ready. My legs were weak. My skin pulled in odd, tight directions from the grafts. The world outside the hospital doors looked too loud, too fast. But my name was on the chart and the bed was needed for someone else. That morning, Lisa the nurse helped me dress, soft clothes donated by a local church. She wrapped my wrist brace, adjusted my compression socks, and clipped my ID band like it was a ceremony. "Someone's picking you up," she asked gently. I nodded. "My parents." The words felt foreign. I hadn't seen them in almost a month. "They said they'd take me to dinner." Lisa gave me a cautious smile, like she didn't want to say what she was thinking. I didn't blame her. I didn't want to say what I was thinking either. That maybe they were only showing up because they couldn't avoid the optics anymore. At 6:15 sharp, they arrived. My father's car, a spotless gray Lexus I wasn't allowed to ride in as a teenager because of the leather, pulled up to the curb. My mother stepped out first, heels clicking against the pavement. Her makeup was perfect, like she'd spent extra time to look composed. Kelsey wasn't with them. I was both relieved and slightly disappointed by that. My father opened the passenger door and nodded toward me. "Need help getting in?" "I'm fine," I said, ignoring the ache that shot through my ribs as I slid into the seat. The car smelled like pine air freshener and expensive silence. They took me to a local diner, Del's, the kind with syrupy booths and laminated menus. We used to come here after softball games when I was 10. Back when they still cheered for me. Back when I still thought cheering meant love. I expected awkward small talk, but the silence at our table was almost strategic, controlled. "How's your pain?" my mom finally asked, as if she'd rehearsed the question. "It depends on the day." She nodded. "You're walking well." I didn't know how to respond to that. It wasn't a compliment. It felt like a checkpoint. The waitress came, took our order. I asked for soup. I wasn't hungry, but holding the warm mug in both hands gave me something to do. I tried. I really did. "Thanks for picking me up," I said, pushing through the brittle air between us. My father gave a half nod. "We rearranged our schedules." And there it was, the subtle reminder that their time was currency, that I should be grateful. When the food arrived, we all poked at our plates like strangers forced into a meal by circumstance, which I suppose we were. "So," I said carefully, "I was hoping I could stay at the house for a few days, just until I find something more permanent." My mother set down her fork. My father didn't look up from his plate. Then from across the table, she said it. I don't think that's a good idea. A beat. I just need a few days, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Not forever. It's not about that, she replied too quickly. It's just Kelsey's staying in the guest room now and we don't have the space. And it's been such a stressful time. I looked at my father. He sipped his coffee. I'm your daughter, I whispered. I almost died. My mother shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting to nearby tables like she was embarrassed. And then came the final blow. We just don't want to take care of a disabled person right now, she said flatly. The word hit me like glass, disabled. Like I was suddenly a burden to be managed. An inconvenience. I felt my mouth open, then close again. My body folded in on itself, not from pain, but from shame. Not the shame of being weak, but of ever believing they'd be my refuge. I stood up slowly, every part of me aching. I'll call a cab, I said. Ellie, my father started, but I didn't wait for his sentence to die. I walked out, Kane tapping the tile floor behind me like a metronome of rejection, out into the cold night. Alone again. But this time, it wasn't a tragedy. It was a decision. Back at the hospital, the night staff greeted me like I was coming home. Lisa saw me first. She didn't ask why I was back. Just nodded once, then wrapped me in a gentle hug that somehow said we knew they wouldn't catch you. I didn't need to explain. They tucked me into a temporary recovery room, smaller than my old one, but cozy, with soft blankets and a window that faced the parking lot. Someone had left a plastic orchid on the windowsill. I stared at it for a long time, wondering how something fake could still look so defiantly beautiful. I curled up under the sheets, Kane resting beside the bed like a sentinel, and for the first time since leaving, I allowed myself to exhale. It wasn't until the door clicked shut behind the nurse that the tears came. Not hot, angry ones, just slow and quiet, like my body was leaking sadness it couldn't hold anymore. I didn't cry for the fire, or even for the pain. I cried because I had begged. I had asked for crumbs of care, and even then they said no. The next morning, I woke to the sound of laughter outside my room. Lisa peeked in. You've got visitors, she said, eyes twinkling. The rowdy kind. Confused, I sat up slowly, adjusting the pillows behind me. And then I saw them, Cora, Dave, and 2 others from the trauma group. Cora waltzed in first, carrying a tiny cactus in a neon pink pot. Your plant died while you were gone. We're staging a replacement. Dave wheeled in behind her with a bag of gummy worms and a second-hand puzzle box that had clearly been opened a few too many times. It's a picture of a lighthouse, he said proudly. We figured it was a metaphor. For what? I asked, half smiling. Survival, he said with a shrug. Or loneliness, or maybe we just liked the seagull on the box. Cora plopped the cactus beside the orchid. You need some greenery in here, even the fake kind. I blinked back sudden tears. You didn't have to. Ellie, Cora interrupted gently. You're one of us. We don't let each other fall. That night, the room felt warmer. The orchid and cactus stood side by side like unlikely sisters, and the puzzle box waited patiently on my table, a quiet invitation back into a world of color. But even small miracles had their shadows. Around midnight, a knock at the door broke the calm. A woman stepped in, short, gray blazer, clipboard clutched like a shield. Ellie Carter, she asked. Yes, I said cautiously, pulling my sweater tighter. I'm Susan Beckett. I'm with the hospital's social work department. Something in her voice told me this wasn't a friendly visit. She sat down across from me, smoothing her skirt. I wanted to speak with you privately. Your insurance plan covers extended post-op recovery, but that coverage expires in 3 weeks. My stomach dropped. What happens after that? She didn't sugarcoat it. You'll need to transition out. Either to a rehab facility if you qualify or to independent housing. We can assist with applications, but most wait lists are long. I don't have anywhere to go, I said quietly. She nodded sympathetically. You're not alone. Many patients face the same challenge. We'll do what we can to help with placement, but I wanted to be upfront. Time moves quickly. After she left, the silence felt heavier than before. 3 weeks. 21 days until the warm blankets, the puzzle, the hospital food I had started to weirdly enjoy gone. I turned toward the window. The plastic orchid swayed slightly in the HVAC breeze. They gave me a bed when no one else would. But even that bed had an expiration date. The next morning, I didn't bother with breakfast. I just sat at the edge of my bed, staring at the cactus and the puzzle box. The cactus was leaning a little, as if it too was exhausted from holding it together. And the lighthouse on the puzzle looked lonelier than before. I was running out of time. The social worker's visit had shifted something in me. A deadline. A countdown. For weeks, I had told myself I'd figure something out. Once I was stronger, once my hands stopped shaking, once my burns didn't sting every time I moved. But once was turning into too late far too quickly. Cora noticed it immediately when she came by that afternoon. "You've got that look," she said, handing me a wrapped sandwich. "Like someone just told you Santa Claus isn't real." I forced a smile. Santa Claus never dropped off housing vouchers. She plopped onto the chair beside my bed and pulled out her own lunch. "You know," she said between bites, "when I got kicked out of rehab the first time, I thought that was the end. I had nowhere to go, stayed in a friend's garage for a while, ate crackers for a week straight." I blinked. "That's awful." "Yeah, but it taught me something. You find out who your real people are real fast." Her words stayed with me. That night I was drifting off when I heard a knock. I expected a nurse or another visit from the social worker. Instead, a voice called softly through the door. "Ellie, it's Sam from high school." I sat up so fast my stitches pulled. Sam Owens. We hadn't spoken in over 6 years. We were best friends once before Kelsey decided Sam wasn't cool enough and our parents made it awkward. "Come in," I called, stunned. He stepped into the room holding a balloon bouquet and a tray of cookies. "I saw a post online," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "Someone from town shared it about the fire. I couldn't believe it. I just wanted to see how you were doing." I stared at the tray, chocolate chip still warm, he'd remembered. "I'm managing," I said quietly. He pulled a chair closer. "You always were." And then, as if the universe had decided I'd suffered enough for 1 week, something unbelievable happened. Over the next hour, 2 more familiar faces walked through the door. Tracy and Maribel, friends I hadn't spoken to in years, each carrying little things, fuzzy socks, a crossword book, a bag of tangerines. "We saw Sam's post," Tracy said breathlessly. "You look amazing, by the way, like a badass phoenix." "I cried when I saw the hospital name," Maribel added. "We're so sorry it took us this long." I was speechless. All these people who had disappeared from my life, not out of cruelty, but out of time and drift and life, were showing up now. They didn't ask why my parents hadn't come. They didn't ask for an explanation. They just showed up. We laughed for an hour. They told me about their jobs, their latest dating disasters. Sam offered to help me search for apartments. Maribel knew someone with a basement unit opening up next month. Tracy worked at a cafe and said they were always hiring. The social worker's countdown was still ticking, but for the first time, it didn't feel like I was counting down to nothing. After they left, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, heart full in a way I hadn't felt since before the fire. Sometimes, family doesn't come when you call, but sometimes, friendship answers when you least expect it. A week later, my phone rang with a name I hadn't seen in weeks. Dad. I stared at the screen, thumb hovering. Every instinct said ignore it, but curiosity won. Maybe guilt had finally cracked through their perfect shell. I answered on the 4th ring. "Ellie," he said, his voice was low, cautious. "Your grandfather isn't well, he's asking for you." My chest tightened. Grandpa Joe, my mother's father, the only one who ever really saw me. "When?" I asked. "He's been declining fast," my father said. "We thought maybe seeing you would lift his spirits." We. As if they suddenly remembered I existed. I agreed before I could overthink it. For Grandpa, not them. The next afternoon, they picked me up from the hospital. My mother didn't speak the whole drive. She kept her eyes forward, tapping her fingernails on the steering wheel like she couldn't wait for it to be over. We pulled into the driveway of their colonial-style house, white shutters and a porch swing untouched since Kelsey's graduation photos. "I just need to lie down for a bit before we go," my mom said, unlocking the door. "We'll leave soon." "I could rest here too," I said softly. "Just for a night." She didn't answer. In the living room, Kelsey sat cross-legged on the couch, scrolling her phone. She didn't even glance up. When I cleared my throat, she looked at me, eyes flat. "Oh," she said, "you're back." Like I was a stray cat they had briefly fed and forgotten. "I'm here to see Grandpa." "Good luck with that," she muttered, turning her attention back to her screen. I tried to let it slide. I tried. Over dinner, lukewarm pizza eaten in stony silence, I asked the question that had haunted me since that awful diner night. Do you all really think I'm a burden? The silence that followed said everything. Then Kelsey, without even looking up, delivered the blow. We don't want to take care of a disabled person, Ellie. That's not our job. The words didn't come like an explosion. They came like a slow, suffocating wave. I didn't ask for this, I whispered. You didn't ask for a lot of things, she said, tone indifferent. But that doesn't mean we should rearrange our lives. My father cleared his throat like he wanted to intervene, but didn't. That hurt worse. I stood slowly. Thanks for dinner. No one stopped me. As I left the house, my cane tapped the front steps like a gavel delivering its verdict. Guilty not of being broken, but of finally asking them to see me. Back at the hospital, Lisa took one look at me and didn't say a word. Just pulled out a blanket, handed me a cup of ginger tea, and sat beside me while I stared out the window at nothing. They said I'm too much, I finally murmured. Too broken, too inconvenient. Lisa placed a hand gently on mine. Then maybe it's time you stopped asking them to carry you, she said, and started walking your own damn way even if it hurts. I didn't cry this time. Not when I left their house, not even when the hospital door clicked shut behind me. Something inside had gone quiet, not numb exactly, but still. Like my heart was sitting at the bottom of a lake, too tired to splash anymore. The nurses noticed right away. You okay, hun? One of them asked gently as I passed the front desk. I nodded. I lied. But that night I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing Kelsey's voice, casual, sharp, uncaring. That doesn't mean we should rearrange our lives. I wondered what she'd say if I hadn't made it out of the fire. Would she have rearranged her schedule for a funeral? Posted a sad photo on Instagram? Taken a moment to mourn the sister who used to braid her hair before dances? Probably not. That would have required reflection, empathy, depth. I lay in the dark for what felt like hours. The monitors in the hallway beeped softly. The heater clicked on. Somewhere down the hall, a patient groaned in their sleep. At 2 a.m., I broke. It wasn't a loud breakdown, no screaming, no sobbing into my pillow. It was quieter than that, just a slow, steady unraveling. Tears slid down my cheeks, warm against the cool hospital air. My shoulders trembled as I curled inward. Everything I had lost hit me at once. My home, my safety, my body, and now my family. The door creaked open. Lisa stepped in, holding a cup of tea in one hand and a folded blanket in the other. She didn't say anything. She just set them down beside me, pulled up a chair, and sat in silence. Her presence said everything I needed to hear. You are not invisible. You are not alone. I don't know how long we sat like that. Eventually, I fell asleep, the tea untouched, the blanket pulled tight around my chest like armor. In the morning, something had changed. Not the facts, I was still burned, still broke, still drifting in between plans, but the fog had lifted just enough for a new thought to slip through. I need to figure this out. Even if no one else shows up, I have to show up for myself. That afternoon, the social worker returned. Susan Beckett, clipboard in hand, lips pressed into a professional line. I know we had a difficult conversation the other night, she said, but I've been looking into some options. She handed me a printed list of transitional housing programs, medical assistance foundations, and support groups. Some had wait lists. One had a 6-month delay, but 3 were possibilities. I also wanted to let you know, she added. We had a few calls asking about donations in your name. A small online fundraiser was started by Sam, I believe. My heart caught in my throat. He didn't tell me that. Susan smiled, just barely. You've got people out there rooting for you, Ellie. That matters. It did more than I could say. That night I returned to the recovery lounge where our group therapy met. I hadn't been in a few days. Cora waved me over instantly, shoving a half-finished Sudoku aside to make room. Back from the battlefield? She asked with a knowing smirk. Something like that. She studied my face. You look different. I think I hit bottom, I said, and it turns out there's a floor. She nodded. Yeah. And sometimes it's made of people who show up with cookies and sarcasm and cacti. We both smiled. I stayed for the full session, even spoke once. My voice shook, but I made it through. When I mentioned my family's rejection, no one gasped or pitied me. They just nodded, because they knew. They'd lived it too. The next day, the hospital maintenance staff brought in a box of donated decorations for the long-term rooms. Fake vines, paper lanterns, even a string of battery-operated fairy lights. Dave helped me string them across my window. Now, when the lights were off, my room glowed faintly like a beacon, a place not just to survive, but to rebuild. The next morning, a nurse walked in carrying a bundle of balloons, a tray of cookies, and a stack of cards rubber-banded together. "Someone's popular today," she teased. I blinked. "What is that?" She set everything down at the edge of my bed. "These came in this morning, from the front desk. Apparently you've got fans." I stared at the cards. The top one had glitter on it. I picked it up slowly and read. "Ellie, we don't know each other well, but I saw your story online and I just want to say you're incredible. Keep going. You're not alone." Janelle, class of 2013, the name rang a distant bell. We'd gone to school together, maybe shared a chemistry lab. I opened another. "Ellie, I still remember the time you let me eat lunch with you when I got transferred in junior year. You were the only one who didn't make me feel like a freak." That kindness stuck. Brandon W. card after card, old classmates, neighbors, teachers, even someone from the sandwich shop down the street from my apartment where I used to get tuna melts and sit with a book. Each message was like a stitch tugging me back together. The cookies were homemade. I recognized the handwriting on the bag, Tracy's loopy cursive. I smiled for the first time that day, and not just the polite kind. The kind that starts from somewhere deep and warm and defiant. A few hours later, the door opened again, and in walked 3 people I never thought I'd see together again. Tracy, Maribel, and Sam. This time they brought more than cookies. "Okay," Tracy said, dramatically plopping a tote bag onto my bed. "We're calling this Operation Restart. You don't get to argue." Inside were essentials. A hoodie, a notepad, a pen, fuzzy socks, lip balm, and oddly, a stress ball shaped like a lemon. "Because," Maribel said with a wink, "when life gives you burns, make lemonade." Sam stepped forward more slowly. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept much, but his eyes were steady. "I also talked to my cousin," he said. "She manages an apartment complex not far from here. One unit just opened up. It's small, but it's on the first floor, no stairs, and she's willing to waive the deposit if you can cover partial rent. We could help." My throat closed up. "I can't ask you to." "You didn't," Sam said gently. "We offered." I felt tears prick behind my eyes. "Why now, after so long?" Tracy knelt beside the bed and squeezed my hand. "Because sometimes it takes something big for people to realize how long they've been silent." Maribel nodded. "And sometimes the ones who aren't blood show up like family." I looked at all 3 of them, friends I'd once laughed with during cafeteria drama and stupid high school crushes. Friends I had lost, not to fights, but to time. And yet here they were, not out of guilt, but out of love. We spent the afternoon sitting around my room, eating cookies and planning what furniture I'd need, what help I'd accept, what still terrified me. It was the first time in months I didn't feel like a patient or a burden. I felt like Ellie again, the version of me that cracked jokes, that liked mint tea and rainy days and crossword puzzles, the version I thought had been burned away in the fire. That night I turned on the string lights above my window and looked around the room. Cactus, orchid, puzzle, notes taped to the walls, cards in every color. Maybe I didn't have a house yet. Maybe I didn't have a traditional family, but I had people. People who saw me. People who stayed. And suddenly, that felt like more than enough. The call came just after breakfast. I was halfway through a bland bowl of oatmeal when the nurse knocked, holding out the phone like it was made of glass. "It's your father," she said quietly. I stared at it for a moment before taking it. My hands no longer trembled when I heard his voice. That was progress. "Ellie," he said, "it's your grandfather. He's asking for you. It's time." The words sat heavily between us. Grandpa Joe, the one who used to grow tomatoes in his backyard and let me eat them straight off the vine, who took me to the science museum every summer, who whispered, "Don't let anyone make you small," when I was 12 and crying after Kelsey called me weird. I hadn't seen him in almost a year. They'd kept him tucked away, as they always did with things that were inconvenient or real. I pressed the phone closer. "Does he know what happened?" A pause. "I don't think so," Dad admitted. "He's been asking why you haven't visited. We didn't want to upset him." So they'd lied. Again. I should have expected that. Still, I found myself nodding. "I'll come." That afternoon, Sam drove me. I could have asked for a hospital transport van, but something about Sam's old green pickup with its humming engine and sticky cup holders felt right, like a bridge back to something unbroken. "Sure you're up for this?" he asked as he pulled into the driveway of my grandfather's modest brick house. I nodded, though my heart pounded in my ears. Inside, the air was warm and faintly herbal, chamomile, maybe. A nurse I didn't recognize greeted us quietly and led me to the back room. I stepped in, and there he was. Grandpa Joe lay in a reclined bed near the window, thin and pale, but still unmistakably him. His eyes were closed, his chest rising gently beneath a quilt I remembered from my childhood. For a moment, I didn't know what to do. Then his eyes fluttered open, and he smiled. "Ellie girl," he rasped, voice dry but filled with light. "There you are." I sank into the chair beside him, blinking fast. "Hi, Grandpa," he reached for my hand. "They said you were busy, but I knew that wasn't right. You always come." I swallowed hard. "I wanted to, I wasn't allowed." His brow furrowed. "What happened?" And so I told him everything, not in dramatic, bitter swells, but in steady, honest pieces. The fire, the hospital, the silence from my parents, the things Kelsey had said, the things they didn't do. His face changed as I spoke, shock, anger, pain. At one point he tried to sit up but winced and fell back into the pillows. "I didn't know," he whispered. "They didn't tell me." "I figured," I said softly, "you would have come." "Of course I would have," he snapped, then softened again. "Ellie, I'm so sorry. I should have asked sooner. I should have made them tell me the truth." I leaned forward, gripping his fingers. "It's not your fault." But something in him had already shifted. He turned his head toward the door. "Call my lawyer," he said hoarsely. "Now." "Grandpa, I promised you the house when you were 16, he said. "You remember that?" I nodded. Of course I did. He'd made me pinky swear I'd fill it with music and laughter and books. "Well, that promise still stands." I didn't know what to say. Tears slid down my face again, but this time they were different. Not grief, not shame, gratitude. I stayed by his side for hours. We talked about his garden, about how the tomatoes were probably overrun by weeds now. He asked about Sam, and I told him how he'd shown up when no one else had. He smiled at that. When his eyes started to close again, I stood to leave, but he held my hand tighter. "Don't disappear again," he murmured. "I won't," I promised. He nodded once. "Good. Now go rest, Ellie girl. The world's waiting on you." The next morning, I was still at the hospital when the lawyer called. "Mr. Joseph Abbott requested an immediate amendment to his will," the voice on the phone said briskly. "He was very clear. He wanted you present when it was finalized." My breath caught. He wasn't wasting time. By noon, I was sitting in Grandpa's bedroom again, the afternoon sun slanting across the faded rug. His lawyer, a tall man in a navy sweater vest with the calm air of someone used to family storms, laid out the paperwork on the bedside table. "Keep this brief," he said, glancing at Grandpa. "Just sign where I've marked." My grandfather's hands shook slightly as he picked up the pen, but his eyes, those were steady, fierce, even. He signed each page without hesitation. "I trust you," he said, placing the pen down and turning toward me. "They tried to erase you." He was talking about my parents, about Kelsey, about all the stories they'd spun in his absence. "They told me you were fine," he said quietly, "that you were recovering somewhere upstate, that you didn't want to visit." My throat tightened. He looked down at his hands, then back at me. "I thought you'd moved on, that you didn't care." "I never stopped caring," I whispered. He smiled at that, tired but full of pride. "Then let this be my apology." The lawyer closed the folder. "The house will transfer upon Mr. Abbott's passing. All necessary arrangements have been made." I stayed by Grandpa's side for hours after the lawyer left, listening to his breathing, holding his hand. That night, just before midnight, his breath slowed. I watched his chest rise once, then still. My hand never left his. I sat in the dark beside him, not afraid, not devastated, just full. Full of sorrow, yes, but also of something steady and healing. He had seen me, and he had made it undeniable. When the will was read a week later, the room nearly cracked in two. My parents sat on one side of the polished conference table, Kelsey beside them in oversized sunglasses like she was shielding herself from consequence. I sat on the other side, Sam quietly at my back. The lawyer opened the folder and began to read. By the time he reached the line, "I leave my residence and remaining estate to my granddaughter, Eleanor Carter, for her loyalty and strength when others failed to show either." My mother's face was bloodless. My father leaned forward like he hadn't heard correctly. Kelsey scoffed. "This is a joke. She manipulated him." I didn't move, didn't speak. I didn't need to. The paper spoke for me now. "This isn't fair," my mother said sharply. "He promised us." "No," the lawyer interrupted. "He promised Ellie years ago. This is simply honoring that." They could argue all they wanted, but it was done. And this time, no one could rewrite the truth. I didn't look back as I left the lawyer's office. Not at my parents, whose silence was now heavier than all their excuses. Not at Kelsey, whose rage flickered behind her sunglasses like a fire denied oxygen. Sam opened the passenger door for me. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded slowly. "I think for the first time in a long while I actually am." The ride to Grandpa's house felt like a dream. My house now. Every street we passed looked different, not because the city had changed, but because I had. I was no longer someone waiting for a rescue that would never come. I was someone who had learned how to walk, limping, burned, scarred, but forward. The house was just as I remembered. White shutters, crooked mailbox. The wind chime Grandpa had built from old spoons and bottle caps clinked gently in the breeze as I stepped onto the porch. Inside, it smelled like lemon oil and garden soil. The curtains were still drawn the way he liked, letting in golden sunlight that painted the floor in warm squares. I stood in the living room for a long time, hand on my cane, heart full. This wasn't just inheritance. It was restoration, of dignity, of voice, of memory. I could almost hear his voice. "Make this a place that laughs, Ellie girl. Promise me that." I did. That evening I unpacked slowly. The cactus from the hospital went on the kitchen windowsill. Alyssa's crayon card took its place on the fridge. The puzzle box was already on the coffee table, lighthouse side up. That night I made tea in Grandpa's old kettle, sat on the porch in his creaky rocking chair, watched the sky melt into stars, and I felt safe. No parents hovering, no Kelsey lashing out, no hospital beeps or whispered judgments, just quiet, and a future that belonged to me. When I finally went inside, I opened the drawer of the hall cabinet and found something unexpected. A letter. My name was scrawled across the front in Grandpa's crooked handwriting. I opened it with shaking hands. "Ellie girl, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and hopefully you're home. I want you to know how proud I am, not because of what you've done, but because of who you are. You held your head up when they tried to bury you. That's more strength than most people carry in a lifetime. Don't waste your time trying to fix people who refuse to hold you when you were broken. Love the ones who show up. Build your life with the bricks they threw at you. This house is yours. Fill it with joy, and maybe grow some tomatoes." I miss the smell. With all the love I never stopped holding, Grandpa Joe. I pressed the letter to my chest and let the tears fall, soft, grateful and healing. He had seen me, and now I saw myself too. 3 months later, my house smelled like fresh paint, basil, and laughter. We were halfway through the housewarming party when Cora burst through the back door carrying a tray of deviled eggs and a Bluetooth speaker already blasting 80s pop. "Hope you like disco," she shouted over the music. "Because we're dancing by sundown." Dave rolled in after her with a six-pack of sparkling water and a stack of board games. Behind them, Sam carried a folding table like it weighed nothing. I stood in the doorway, watching it all, my friends, my chosen family, spill into the space Grandpa left me, like sunlight finally filling a once-forgotten room. The living room was strung with fairy lights and laughter. The dining table was covered in mismatched snacks and paper plates. Maribel was already decorating cupcakes in the corner while Tracy debated her on frosting strategy. I couldn't stop smiling. The scars on my arms were still visible. The tightness in my legs didn't fade completely. I walked a little slower, sometimes limped when it rained. But nobody stared anymore. Not here. Here they saw me. I'd spent weeks transforming the house. One wall in the kitchen now held a mural, a messy collage of old photos, handwritten recipes, and notes from people who helped me heal. In the backyard, I had started a tiny garden, just 3 tomato plants and a stubborn row of chives. Every inch of this house was mine. Not because of a will, but because I had survived to claim it. As the sun dipped low, casting everything in a golden haze, I grabbed a glass and climbed onto the back porch. Everyone quieted when they saw me. Sam raised his glass and the rest followed. I took a deep breath. I wasn't supposed to be here, I said, voice steady. Not according to them, but here I am, still healing, still growing, still whole. A hush fell over the yard. This house was given to me by someone who believed in showing up, and today, look at you. You showed up for me for this moment. I held up my glass. To boundaries, chosen families, and burning what no longer serves you. The cheer that erupted could have cracked the stars open. Cora jumped up onto a lawn chair and screamed, "To Ellie, the baddest phoenix in Oregon." Laughter roared. Music resumed. And just like that, my life began again, not with revenge or rage, but with joy. Later, as the moon rose and the last guests drifted home, Sam lingered behind to help clean up. We stood in the kitchen together, shoulder to shoulder, rinsing glasses and sneaking bites of leftover cake. He glanced at me. "You know you built this, right? Not the house, the life." I smiled. "Yeah, I think I finally do." Outside, wind stirred the tomato plants gently, leaves rustling like a quiet applause. And for the first time in years, I felt something I almost didn't recognize. Peace.